I used to think I was overthinking things. You know, the way your gut whispers that something's off, but your brain tells you to stop being paranoid. That was me, brushing off the feeling, making excuses for him, telling myself, he's just tired, he's just stressed, this is just a phase. We'd been together for 3 years, nothing glamorous, just real life. We shared rent, split groceries, fought over laundry, and spent lazy Sundays binge-watching shows. He wasn't perfect, and neither was I, but I thought we had something solid, safe. I started noticing little things around our 2.5 years. Nothing dramatic, just subtle shifts. He stopped texting during the day like he used to. He'd come home later, sometimes with vague explanations. Work ran late, got drinks with the guys, didn't hear my phone, and somehow I believed him. Or maybe I wanted to. He used to leave his phone lying around. It would buzz, light up. Nothing to hide. Then one day, I realized he started carrying it everywhere, even to the bathroom. Always face down. Always locked. I didn't want to be that person. The one who snoops, who accuses, who turns into someone she hates. But a voice inside me kept whispering, this isn't nothing. The sex changed too. Not gone, just different, quicker, less connected, like he was somewhere else in his head. I'd lay next to him at night and feel lonelier than when I was single. But I kept pretending, smiling through dinners, laughing at his jokes, trying to be the cool girlfriend who doesn't nag, who trusts her man. One night, I was washing dishes and he was in the shower. His phone buzzed on the counter, just once. Normally, I wouldn't have looked, but something in me, maybe fear, maybe instinct, told me to check. The message was from someone saved as M, just one line. Last night was perfect. I miss you already. I froze, literally stopped breathing for a second. My hands were shaking, the water kept running, so did my mind. I didn't confront him right away. Instead, I acted normal, too normal. I handed him his towel, kissed his cheek, said I love you, and hated myself for it. I didn't sleep that night. In the morning, I went to work as usual, smiled at my coworkers, answered emails, but inside, everything cracked. And in that silence, in that ache, I realized something painful. I already knew. My heart had known long before my eyes saw the proof. Looking back now, the warning signs were there. Small, almost insignificant moments that, at the time, felt like nothing. But they piled up quietly. We were 6 months into the relationship when I started to notice them. At first, it was just subtle things. The way he would check out during conversations, how he seemed less eager to share his thoughts, his plans, his day. I remember one night vividly. We were supposed to go out for dinner. Nothing fancy, just our usual Thursday spot. I'd had a rough day at work and was really looking forward to seeing him. Venting a little, laughing like we always did. But when I got to his apartment, he barely looked up from his phone. He was lying on the couch, scrolling, and mumbled something about being tired. I offered to order takeout instead, thinking maybe he just needed a quiet night. He agreed with a shrug, and we spent the evening mostly in silence. That wasn't like us. At first, I blamed it on stress. He had a demanding job, and he'd mentioned a difficult project he was handling. I gave him space, thinking it was temporary. But then it started to happen more frequently. The jokes between us felt flatter. The long, meandering conversations we used to have before falling asleep were replaced by the glow of 2 separate phone screens. One day, I asked him casually if everything was okay. He nodded, kissed me on the forehead, and said, "You worried too much." Maybe I did. But I also started to worry for real, not in an overreacting kind of way, just a gut feeling. It's strange how you can still be in love and yet feel the pull of something unraveling. I tried to be more attentive, thinking maybe he just needed reassurance. I cooked his favorite meals, left little notes in his work bag, even surprised him with tickets to a concert he once mentioned. He smiled, said thank you, but I could tell the spark in his eyes wasn't the same. There was one evening when we sat across from each other at a new Thai place. He barely touched his food. When I asked what was wrong, he said nothing, just tired. But it wasn't just tired. It was like he was somewhere else entirely. And I started to feel like I was trying too hard. I began questioning myself. Was I becoming too clingy, too sensitive? Should I pull back and let him breathe? I hated how much I thought about it. How often I rewrote texts before sending them. How I found myself rehearsing conversations in my head, trying to avoid sounding too much. The emotional distance was growing. We were still technically close, sleeping next to each other, saying I love you, making weekend plans, but something unspoken had crept in, an invisible wall. I began to miss the version of him who used to reach for my hand in the middle of the night or surprise me with coffee just because. We hadn't fought yet. That would come later. For now, it was just a slow slide into uncertainty. I kept hoping it was a phase. That maybe next week things would go back to how they were. That maybe I was just imagining it. But deep down, I already knew. Something was changing. And I had no idea how to stop it. The silence between us stopped being temporary and started feeling like the norm. We'd sit next to each other on the couch, watching something on TV, and not say a word for hours. I used to think silence could be comfortable. It meant you were close enough not to fill every second with chatter. But this wasn't that kind of silence. It was cold. It was the sound of two people quietly pulling away from each other. One morning, I woke up and found him already dressed, grabbing his keys. "You going somewhere?" I asked, my voice still raspy with sleep. "Just need to clear my head," he said without looking at me. He didn't kiss me goodbye. That became routine. He'd disappear for hours with vague excuses. I never questioned him directly, but my mind did all the questioning for me. Was there someone else? Was he just bored? Did he regret being with me? I checked his phone once when he was in the shower. I hated myself for it, but I couldn't help it. There were no suspicious messages, nothing incriminating, and somehow that made me feel worse. Because it meant the distance wasn't about anyone else, it was about us. Our first real fight happened on a Sunday. We'd been invited to his friend's birthday dinner. I was already dressed, waiting by the door, and he came out of the bedroom saying, "I'm not going, I don't feel like it." "You could have told me sooner," I said, trying to stay calm. "I've been waiting." He rolled his eyes. "You always make everything a big deal." That hit me. Because it wasn't about the dinner. It was about feeling like an afterthought, like I didn't matter enough for him to communicate with me. The argument spiraled from there. Words we didn't mean, accusations, tears. I slept on the couch that night. After that, the emotional roller coaster began. Good days followed by terrible ones. He'd hold me in the middle of the night and tell me he loved me, and the next day he'd be distant again. I lived for the good days, for the smiles and soft touches. But they became rare. The emotional exhaustion started to show. I was distracted at work. I pulled away from friends. My world shrank down to the hope of fixing something that clearly wasn't working. But I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Somewhere inside, I still believed we could come back from this. That maybe we just needed time, effort, something. Even if I didn't know what that something was. He started coming home later. Some nights he didn't come home at all, and the worst part was, I stopped asking why. I told myself it was to avoid conflict. But really, I think I was scared of the answer. I didn't want to hear him say out loud what I already feared, that he didn't care enough to explain. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, going over every moment we'd shared, trying to pinpoint the exact moment things changed. I wanted to believe this was just a phase, a rough patch every couple goes through, but deep down I was starting to accept that maybe we were just slowly falling apart. We functioned like roommates. There were no more kisses goodbye, no more weekend plans. Our conversations were reduced to practicalities. Can you grab milk on the way home? Or did you pay the electricity bill? There was no warmth, no spark. Just the dull rhythm of coexisting. One night I finally asked, "Do you still love me?" He looked up from his phone, blinked, and said, "Of course I do." Don't be dramatic. That answer hurt more than if he'd said no, because it wasn't just dismissive, it was careless. I needed honesty. I needed to hear something real, even if it was painful. I started spending more time out of the apartment, going for long walks after work, sitting alone at cafes, watching couples talk and laugh like we used to. I envied their ease. I envied the way they looked at each other like they mattered. One evening, while walking through the park, I ran into an old friend I hadn't seen in years. We ended up talking for hours. It felt so easy, so light. I wasn't walking on eggshells or calculating every word. I was just myself. When we said goodbye, he hugged me tightly and said, "You deserve to be happy." I cried the whole way home. Not because I had feelings for that friend, but because his words hit a part of me I'd been avoiding. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel loved. I felt alone in a relationship that was supposed to be my safe place. That night, I looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. I barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked tired. She looked unsure. And most of all, she looked heartbroken. I knew something had to change. But I still wasn't ready to walk away. Not yet. I started to keep secrets. Not big ones, just small truths I didn't feel safe enough to share anymore. Like how I'd cried in the bathroom at work after reading an old message from him back when things were good. Or how I sometimes pretended to be asleep when he got home late, just to avoid the disappointment of trying to talk. I didn't tell him about the raise I got or how my manager praised my recent project. I wasn't hiding out of spite, I just didn't see the point. We had reached that stage where even good news felt like a burden to share. He, on the other hand, barely said anything about his day unless I asked directly, and even then, his answers were short. It was fine, just work, nothing new. I could feel a whole world of emotion under the surface, but it was locked behind a door I no longer had the key to. One night, after days of cold silence, I decided to talk. Not to fight, not to accuse, just talk. "I don't feel like we're okay," I said gently. "I miss us." He stared at the TV for a second before muting it. "We're just busy," he said. "It's normal." "Is it?" I asked. He shrugged. Relationships change. And that was it. No follow-up, no attempt to ask how I was feeling or what I needed, just that dull, emotionless conclusion. Relationships change. As if love had an expiration date and we'd silently agreed to watch it rot. That night, I lay awake thinking about how long I'd been unhappy. How many nights I'd stared at the ceiling, replaying old memories like movie scenes, laughing in bed, dancing in the kitchen, him pulling me into his chest when I had nightmares. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was mourning. I missed the version of him who used to care. I missed the version of me who used to feel enough. I started writing in a journal again, just to get the feelings out somewhere. Pages filled with questions I couldn't ask aloud. Why am I still here? Why does it feel like I'm the only one trying? When did we stop being partners and become strangers? One entry ended with, "I think I'm grieving someone who's still alive." That realization broke me. Eventually, friends started noticing. My best friend asked me over coffee, "Are you okay? You don't seem like yourself lately." I smiled and said I was just tired. But later, when I got home, I cried. Because it was true. I wasn't myself, and I hadn't been for a while. But I wasn't ready to tell anyone the full truth. I still wore the mask, smiling in photos, showing up to events, saying we're good when asked. I was afraid of what admitting the truth would mean. That maybe love wasn't enough, that maybe we couldn't fix this. I clung to the little moments, his hand brushing mine in passing, the rare nights he kissed my forehead before bed, the way he once reached for me in his sleep. Those crumbs of affection kept me going. I told myself it meant something, that deep down he still cared. But love shouldn't feel like chasing scraps. I was tired of begging for connection, of twisting myself into someone smaller, quieter, easier to love. Something inside me was changing, slowly, quietly. I wasn't sure what would happen next. I didn't know if I had the strength to leave or if he had the will to fight for us. But for the first time, I started imagining a life outside this apartment, a life where I didn't feel invisible. And that terrified me more than anything. I didn't leave. Not yet. But I started to create space. Little, invisible gaps that only I knew were there. I stayed longer at work. I picked up weekend plans I used to turn down. I went to the gym again, not to look better for him, but to feel something for myself. It felt strange, rediscovering small parts of my identity that I'd buried for so long under the weight of trying to fix our relationship. There was one Sunday morning that stays with me. I woke up early, made coffee, and stood by the window, watching the lights spill across the kitchen floor. He was still asleep. For once, I felt calm, not happy, not content, just calm, and it scared me how peaceful the quiet felt without him. Later that day, he noticed the folded gym towel in my bag. "You started working out again?" he asked, casually. I nodded. "Yeah, just trying to clear my head." He didn't say much after that. Maybe he didn't know what to say. Or maybe he didn't care. The worst part was, I wasn't even sure I cared anymore whether he noticed or not. That terrified me. How numb I'd become. Still, we kept going through the motions. We ate dinner together, sometimes in silence, sometimes with small talk about his job or my friend's new puppy. We looked like a couple from the outside. Smiled in public. Posted the occasional picture online. But behind the doors of our apartment, we lived parallel lives. One night, we went to a party. It was the first time in months we'd been around other people socially. We laughed, drank, danced. It almost felt normal. But when we got home, the silence returned. Like joy didn't belong to us anymore. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed, unzipping my boots, when he walked past me without a word and disappeared into the bathroom. No eye contact. No "good night." Just nothing. That night, I stared at the ceiling and realized I wasn't holding on to him. I was holding on to a memory of him, a version that maybe only existed in the beginning. We used to dream about the future, names for our kids, places we wanted to visit, silly arguments about who'd do the dishes in our future house. Now, we barely made plans for the weekend. It was like all the color had drained out of what we were building, and I was standing in the ruins, pretending it was still home. I started noticing other couples. Not in a jealous way, just with longing, watching how they touched each other, looked into each other's eyes like they still saw something there. I couldn't remember the last time he looked at me like that. One evening I came home late. My train had been delayed. I walked in and saw him on the couch, TV on, dinner for one on the table. He didn't ask where I'd been, just nodded, as if I were a guest. That was when it hit me. I was already gone, not physically, but emotionally. My heart had already started packing. The moment I stopped trying so hard was the moment I began to feel like myself again, and that scared me, because I realized I was okay without his validation, his attention, his love. I still didn't know what would happen, if I'd walk away or stay and try once more. But I knew this. I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep shrinking just to fit into someone else's fading love. And in that quiet moment, I knew the next decision I made would change everything. The next morning, I didn't wake up to his arms around me like I used to. I woke up to the sound of his alarm, the rustle of clothes, and the door closing behind him without a word. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the silence he left behind. For a while, I just lay there. I thought maybe I'd cry, maybe feel something intense. But I didn't. I just felt still, numb, maybe. Or maybe just tired of carrying everything alone. Later that day, I found an old photo of us tucked in a drawer, one from a beach trip 2 summers ago. We looked so happy. Or maybe we just looked like we thought we were supposed to look. His arm was around me, my head was on his shoulder, and I remembered how I used to love how safe that felt. But now, looking at it, I felt like I was staring at two strangers. I wanted to talk to someone, anyone, but I felt too ashamed. My friends had seen our smiling photos, heard my stories about how great things were. I didn't know how to explain what was happening without sounding like I had failed, like we had failed. So instead, I went to a coffee shop by myself. I brought a book I didn't read and sat by the window, watching the world pass by. There was a couple at the table next to me, laughing quietly, their hands touching between sips. And for a second, I hated them. Not in a real way, but in a painful, hollow way. I hated what they had because I missed what I thought I had. That night, he came home late again. I didn't ask where he'd been, he didn't offer it. We exchanged a few words about groceries and bills, and then we both fell into our separate corners of the couch like roommates. Do you remember our trip to San Diego? I asked suddenly, unsure why I even brought it up. He glanced up from his phone. Yeah, why? I was just thinking about that beach we found, the quiet one. He nodded. Yeah, that was a nice spot. Silence again. That was all I'd get, a half-hearted agreement. And I realized I wasn't trying to make him remember something sweet. I was trying to remind myself that we'd once had something worth remembering. I wanted him to ask me what I was thinking. I wanted him to notice the way I'd stopped trying to fill the silence. But he didn't. He went back to his phone, and I went back to wondering when exactly we had stopped being a team. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud. It was a slow erosion, like waves wearing down a rock. 1,000 small disappointments, shrugged off and stacked on top of each other until they became something solid and cold between us. At some point that evening, I looked over at him and asked the question I'd been avoiding for weeks. Are you happy? He didn't answer right away, just stared at the wall, then finally said, I don't know. And that was the most honest thing he'd said in a long time. I nodded, quietly. Yeah, me neither. We didn't argue, we didn't cry. We just sat there, surrounded by all the words we hadn't said. It was in that silence that I realized something important. We were both too tired to fight, but maybe also too scared to admit that what we had wasn't working anymore. I went to bed alone that night, even though we shared the same room. And as I lay there, I knew something had to change. I woke up before him again. The sun had just started to rise, casting a dull orange light through the blinds. I sat up slowly, letting the silence sink in. He was still asleep, facing away from me. I watched his back rise and fall, wondering when I had stopped feeling close to him, even while lying in the same bed. I knew it was time. Not because something dramatic happened, not because he cheated again or because of a final, awful argument. It was much simpler than that. It was the quiet realization that I didn't feel like myself when I was with him anymore. And even worse, I didn't think I ever would again. I got up and went to the kitchen, made coffee like I always did, except this time I didn't make him a cup. I stood by the window, holding my mug, watching people walking their dogs, heading to work, living their lives. I wondered if anyone had ever looked at me and thought I had it all together. I wondered if they'd ever guessed that every day I was quietly falling apart. He came into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. Morning, he said, reaching for a glass of water. Morning, I replied softly. We stood there in the same room, separated by something invisible but heavy. I think I need some time away, I said, not looking at him. He froze. What do you mean? I mean I need space. Real space, not just silent dinners and cold nights. I need to find myself again. He sat down slowly, still holding the glass. Is this about us? It's always been about us, I said, but also about me. I don't recognize who I've become. I miss the version of me. Before all the overthinking and shrinking and pretending, everything was okay. He looked at me, and for the first time in months, I saw a flicker of emotion. Maybe panic, maybe confusion, maybe just shock. So that's it? You're leaving? I shook my head. I don't know. Maybe not forever. But right now, I need to leave this version of us. He was quiet for a long time. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I did, in 100 ways. You just didn't hear me. We didn't cry. There weren't dramatic scenes. Just quiet understanding that what we had built no longer felt like home for either of us. I packed a bag that afternoon, just the essentials. He didn't stop me. He didn't ask me to stay. And maybe that was the answer I'd been searching for all along. As I walked out of the apartment, the hallway felt longer than usual. Every step echoed. I thought I'd feel relief or maybe pain, but all I felt was stillness, a kind of quiet strength. I went to stay with a friend for a while. Slept on her couch. Started journaling again. Signed up for a pottery class I'd been putting off for years. Every little thing I did without him reminded me I was still a person, whole, valid, enough, even outside of a relationship. He texted a few times. Simple things. Hope you're okay. Thought about you today. I replied politely, but never initiated. I didn't want to reopen wounds that were just starting to scar over. Some nights were hard. I'd lie awake wondering if I gave up too soon. If maybe, with a little more patience, we could have fixed it. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had stayed long after the love stopped feeling like love. A few weeks later, I ran into him. It was awkward at first. We smiled, exchanged a few words. He looked tired. I wondered if he missed me or just the version of me who tried so hard to make things work. Before we parted, he looked at me and said, "You look different." "I feel different," I replied. And I did. I was starting to feel like myself again. We didn't make promises, didn't talk about second chances. That wasn't what this moment was about. This moment was about letting go, not just of each other, but of the expectations, the guilt, the weight we both carried. As I walked away from him that day, I didn't feel broken. I felt whole. Maybe some meetings aren't coincidences. Maybe they're just lessons dressed as love. And maybe the real journey begins not when you find someone else, but when you finally find yourself again.